and the Roman Empire. Get us started about the Roman Empire, Al.
Why you want to talk about Rome, Mike? You want to talk about 1999?
Oh, 99?
No, not 099. We can get to 099. No, remember at the beginning of the year, you and I were looking at the time and saying, we can't find a time in history matching it. We talked about 1999, the .com. We talked about 1924 because we're coming out of a pandemic. We did have World War I, but we don't have a world war right now going on. We do have a lot of conflict going on that could lead to that. But I was doing some research, reading a book about the Roman Empire.
Okay.
I'm pulling it out here. It's called The 10 Caesars by Barry Strauss. He's a professor of history at Cornell University. An interesting book about these guys. But I found some similarities to today that I thought were really applicable.
Okay, let's hear.
So Barack Obama in 2008 was the first black president.
Correct.
And Rome had a first African emperor.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. His name was Severus. He was the first African emperor of Rome in the year 193. And it's kind of interesting because Edward Gibbons, who wrote the classic book The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, says that was the start of the decline of the Roman Empire. Now, some people like Strauss say, well, he was being prejudiced because Severus was African emperor. But after he says that, he goes on to say that when Severus left, he left terrible inflation, and he tried to fund the military, and they had terrible problems at the end of his 19. But if I keep on reading about him, he caused inflation that had disaster effects. That didn't happen to Obama. Just looking at certain other things that went on, and the guy that followed him was a guy by the name of Diocletian, and he was known as the Great Divider.
Okay.
Right? But he wasn't a divider in the sense that that he created division in the country. He basically divided the country from east to west. He divided soldiers and civilians. He divided Christians and pagans, but he was known to be a really gruff character.
Okay.
And he was...
See a lot of similarities?
Yeah,
right?
He was known to be a really gruff character. Some of the stories about him, let's see. So he was a soldier too. So this started a reign of emperors that were soldiers, very military. I mean, he was known to. He got in an argument with one of his soldiers he was with, and in front of a whole battalion of soldiers, he just stabbed the guy to death. He threatened another rebellious city that they would be bathing in the bloods up to the bellies of their horses if they didn't stop what they were doing.
Wow.
So,
really nice guy.
Nice guy. Oh yeah, hell of a. But he. So he reminded me a little bit, of course, like a guy we know today, Mr. Trump, who came right after Obama.
Yeah.
So I see some similarities in that. I mean, not that you can compare 2,000 years ago to today, what they did and how they operated, but Diocletian was interesting because he was also a really good politician. People underestimated his intelligence and his political savvy. Like I think a lot of people do with Trump. They keep coming after him, thinking, we're going to take him down, and he sidesteps him almost every single...
Teflon Don.
Yeah, exactly. So, but he also... At the end of his reign, he's interesting because he's the only Roman emperor to step down. He stepped down voluntarily. He just wanted to, not because they forced him out, because he just says, well, I want to be able to pick my successor, so I'm just going to step down and retire. He retired to what is now Croatia. Mm-hmm. And but he left, so it's according to Strauss, thanks to Diocletian, Rome was better funded militarily, and it had thoroughly deployed on the border new networks of roads and forts. So he secured the border of Rome. So, just say history. What does it say, Mike? History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme.
It does.
And so I just thought this was so applicable to what's going on today. There's so many similarities of what they did, and like the inflation problem we had. You and I talked about inflation a lot. Back then, inflation was caused by what they would do is just debase the currency. They would just, if it was 10% silver, they'd make it 2% silver. So they had silver coins that were 50%. Mostly they were considered 50% silver. Well, they just debased them down to 2 or 3% silver, causing massive inflation. And then they put price ceilings on things and says you can't charge more than this for chicken or whatever it was. And we could try this today. I don't know if this last one would work, but the penalty if you tried to sell something higher than the price was death. So that would really stamp out inflation pretty quick, wouldn't it?
That does. That's called price controls in
So, yeah, and so like a bronze, they had to issue a decree because bronze coins remained way overvalued in the year 301. The government issued a decree cutting the bronze coin in half, so they could that's basically the way they would raise, like the Fed would raise interest rates, like Paul Volcker did in the 80s, right, of rapidly raising interest rates to stamp out inflation. So I guess the Senate of 301 was the Paul Volckers of their day, raising interest rates rapidly. And other things that are similar, Mike. So they were paying for defense. The currency, they had terrible inflation. And on top of that, they had a major epidemic that lasted 15 years. And the population of the cities kept decreasing. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. If you look around Seattle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Didn't you say you went for a walk and you said to me, wow, I didn't notice there was so many vacancies because I drive all the time and I don't see them. But when you walk, wow, you really see them.
When you walk down 4th Avenue in Seattle, it's hard to find a business that's open.
Yeah, yeah. And so, other things like Rome's signature problem back then was political instability, which a lot of people say today, right? Whereas, what's his name? The hedge fund guy, Ray Dalio says, right? Yeah. Saying that China is going to overtake America because of political instability in the United States. We're constantly fighting. We end up in civil war and all that stuff. Before Severus was a guy by the name of Commodus, who was kind of a bonehead emperor. He was the son of Marcus Aurelius, which ended the reign of the 5 good emperors, they called them. And that was a time of about 80-something years of peace and stability during Rome. That's when, then after that, they say that's when the decline really started. So, it's an interesting analysis of what went on then and what goes on today and how similar things are. And we're not much different than that, even though there's thousands of years between us.
We go through those cycles.
But the currency might be different, right? The currency, the things we have and trade, when back then power was military power, right? How many legions control. Today it's how much money do you have?
And we're able to print money. In those days they didn't have paper money.
No, it's coinage.
It's coinage. So instead of adding an ounce of silver to a coin, you would print 10 coins and add a tenth of an ounce. Yep. So that was how they increased the money supply.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
Federal
Reserve.
It's no different,
Well, a few things are different.
Well, a few things. We got running toilets and that, but other than that, and computers and stuff. But other than that,
and our pandemic only lasted a couple of years.
Yeah,
rather than
15. Yeah.
More things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah. But they just did. And these and the politicians say they got nothing on these Roman emperors. These guys were, they were real forward thinkers. Like Severus, when he was in power, he they liked blood hereditary in Rome, right? They wanted to see blood inherit the throne.
Yeah.
And so Severus, who didn't have a bloodline, he decided to adopt himself from Marcus Aurelius, even though Marcus Aurelius was already dead. Could you imagine trying that today?
Interesting.
Creative.
So, yeah, really creative.
So we're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away. We're going to take this now from Roman times to current times and talk about some of these same parallels in what's happening today and what's happening in 2024. Don't go away. We have a guest today, David Schuler. David was on the program in 2015.
Hello again, Mike.
Happy to have you back.
Thank you.
So why don't we start with some of your background, since I'm not sure how many people were listening in 2015, and even if they were, they may not.
I have a very interesting background, and it kind of hits a lot of different stories in my life, and the power of story is the element that kind of carries through. I had a love of cooking my whole life, and I've had a love of design and construction my whole life. Getting through those paths was very interesting in terms of inspiration that brought me down them. And for a significant amount of time, my dream was to have my own restaurant, to have my own store, to create food for people. And I did that. And I successfully ran that for about 7 years. And it was probably one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. It had these effects of it that I had no idea that I would have in my life from the beginning. It was called Dish Urban Market in downtown Ballard.
Okay.
Because if you think about it today, it's a combination of best Whole Foods deli you could imagine, but we also manufactured our own fresh pasta and sauces and prepared foods that were frozen so people could take those home. We had a bunch of specialty foods that people could buy off the shelves. We imported our own French porcelain out of France that people could cook with and serve with. Plus we had a really delicious section that was very value-oriented, important at that stage in time in Ballard. But I got to see people come in over that 7-year period because I was chef owner at a semi kind of open kitchen, and my orientation, I could see customers as they came in. And I got to see people come in on their first dates. I got to see them have kids. I got to see their kids grow up. And it was one of those magical things where you feel like such a connection to a community. That was a part of the reward that I never anticipated, that I still carry like strong to this day, because I now, even though I'm not in that industry, have gotten to know some of these kids who've gone off to college and, you know, have lives and everything. And it's so, I would say magical is a wrong word, but it's also the right word because it just felt so great.
It does sound magical.
And I left that to, I sold that business to Cupcake Royale, took over the space, and they're really stand-up business there. Jody, who owns Cupcake Royale, is quite the entrepreneur. And I went off to a different adventure that was more construction related, and I helped manage a stair company, one of Seattle's premier stair companies that made stairs to the stars all over the country, especially in Hawaii, some other far off destination areas. And we would make everything here with some of the best craftsmen. I brought craftsmen in from France, the Campion de Devaux, and I got to, at the highlight of my career there, was able to travel to Paris, do a presentation on our company to the Campion, and actually was able to recruit from that presentation to come to our shop. The Tour de France, the name actually came from the Campions, because they would go from one shop to another shop all over France and learn their craft. And each place was called a stage. And I was incredibly fortunate to make one of the final stages here in Seattle, at Seattle Stair and Design. And that was the pinnacle of that part of that career. That company has since been sold to a new company. Father and son have taken it over and changed the name. And they're running an awesome company, building high-end architectural features. I left that world to start my own construction company because I had this really strong feeling in my heart and in my life that Glory, which was those really epic big projects for the most famous pool on the planet that we were working on, it filled my cup up for like a day. It'd feel really, really good. But immediately upon that project being over, I needed to jump to the next thing, the next big thing. And jumping around to go to glory was not nearly as fulfilling as gratitude. And I found that working directly with clients and learning what they need and how their lives can be improved by, remodeling or restaging their house so they can get a better price on it, gave me a cup that was filled with gratitude. And that gratitude lasted days and days and days. And it just more sticky, feels so much better. And I've kind of worked really hard at building my team around that idea. So all the craftsmen that work with me really understand the idea of gratitude, work hard with our clients to try to bring, to earn that gratitude. So it's been quite an adventure.
So as an aside, having nothing to do with that, and something that listeners cannot see, but as we're sitting here, you have a chipmunk.
It's actually a stoat.
Oh, a what?
A stoat.
No, what's a stoat?
A stoat is sort of like a ferret, is the easiest way to explain it.
Okay.
And it's a pocket stoat. And it's something that, I think in life it's important to have a little bit of whimsy. And this is my piece of whimsy today.
I just had to ask. I mean,
it just makes me smile.
That's great. Smiling is an important aspect.
Absolutely.
Of our enjoying life.
Absolutely.
Is really important. So let's talk about what you're doing and the projects that you're doing with the current business.
The current business I have now has basically two kind of arms to it. And one of those arms is I work with a select group of real estate agents, and we develop a team between the agents, the clients, and myself to create a design story to reposition their home onto the marketplace and give them the greatest return on their investment with me and my service. My goal is to get them the top price point for that particular home in the market. I almost became an agent myself at one time, and so I understand the process of what it means to be an agent, to be at service, and that's sort of the role that we try to play and give clients the greatest return on their investment through design-driven solutions.
So we've sold a couple houses.
Yeah.
What happens is the real estate agent comes, they do comparables around the neighborhood, say this is the price, we recommend you offer the house at this price, which I do comparables, decide way.
Yeah.
And then they list it and they bring a number of realtors through and eventually the house sells.
Yeah, and that's a short path to it. And if you take a few extra steps along that path and you develop a plan to say, this is the comps that are in your neighborhood, but those comps have either one, a really fantastic ensuite, a really fantastic basement, that's been refinished, and then you look at, well, what can we provide and bring to the marketplace that knocks those comps out of the water? It's a little bit of a harder sell sometimes, but we've been pretty successful in almost every one of our projects that we've done it too.
So give us kind of an example, because it's fascinating for me, because that never happened for us. We just got the basic, the comp, and this is what you should say.
Well, I think the real estate market in terms of the agency has gotten extremely competitive. There's far more agents out there than this, and agents need to differentiate what they're bringing to the marketplace to bring a better value proposition. And so when you are an agent and you bring in something like me who goes, well, if you put your house on the market today, it's going to be, let's call it a nicer neighborhood in Seattle. And if that agent works with me and you go, we could really do a lot better here. And so we come up with a plan, and that plan can be really, literally anywhere between like a $10,000 investment all the way up to a $200,000 investment. And the goal is to not only recoup the money we put into it, but also give them profit as well. And then in that profit, there's also a shorter holding time there, because once it goes on the market, it's a hot property and it goes boom.
It sounds
It is. It takes a lot of moving parts to pull it off. And it's why I only work with a select group, because you have to have a really great relationship with the agent in terms of communicate through them, their client, what's going on, how we're going to make. Because sometimes delays happen and then it messes everybody.
Yeah. So what areas do you work in?
Mostly from the Ship Canal to
Okay. So mostly North Seattle.
Yeah. And that's mostly because driving past the Ship Canal is a hassle.
So,
and the other arm of my business is we just do these epic remodels where they're very design driven. There's definitely the return on investment part is sitting at the table as we're walking through the path of what we're going to be doing with their home. But the primary focus is to give them, the homeowner, the family, a better quality of life. What can we do to improve their lives and to make them, what can we design in as an emotional connection to their home that makes better value?
Sounds awesome.
I like it.
So let the listeners know, how can they get a hold of you?
I am David at Pop Property Services, Pop Property Services on website, poppropertyservices.com. And I can be reached at David at poppropertyservices.com.
And Pop is P-O-P?
P-O-P.
Properties.
Yes.
.com. So that's great. And how long does it take for you to set up an appointment?
It really depends upon the flow of the various different design projects that I have going on. Sometimes I can meet as early, sometimes longer, but I try to establish a conversation as soon as I can. But the process on some of the more epic remodels, it can be a year-long process sometimes, because that's what the project requires.
So once again, give us the information on somebody could get a hold of you.
They can email me at david at poppropertyservices.com.
Okay.
Pleasure speaking with you, Mike.
All right. So welcome back. I was at a luncheon meeting, which was hosted by First Trust. And I think that they made some really interesting comments during that meeting. I had some questions, which were difficult questions, but they made some comments, I think, that I want to share, because I'm not sure that we agree at all with what they said. They were talking about stocks and bonds. They were talking about the outlook for the stock market. They were talking about what's going on in the bond market. And a lot of it revolved around inflation and the outlook. And they were convinced that the Federal Reserve is going to lower interest rate. That's going to happen as well. They took a show of hands to see how many people thought the rates would go down 4%, 2%, 0. And most people were around 3%, a little higher than this. I was at around 4%. And I said, I think the Fed is very aware of the Taylor, which I think surprised Trust. They knew what the Taylor principle was, but the Taylor principle was developed federally to say, if you want inflation, what you need to do is you need to keep rates 1%. And if you look at what the Fed has done, not what they say, but if you look at what they've done, their focus has been on the Taylor principle, being a percentage above what the inflation rate is. And as they begin to look coming down, they'll be sure that the personal consumption expenditure inflation rate is steady or falling some, and then they'll move to the rates. There'll be political pressure, but if you look at what they, not just at what they say, they're following that's when they decided to stop raising rates, is when they achieved a little over 1% over. So I think as I thought about what the First Trust is, we come very different background. First Trust are 40s. They never lived through the 760. I'm old enough that I remember, and I'm into this business. I licensed in 86. And what was going on in the 1980s is you had a lot of economists who were analyzing what went on during the great inflation of the 6 and 7. It was a major topic. And so in First Trust, when I asked the question whether they felt that there was going to be a shift from demand pull to cost push inflation, the response was inflation is inflation. Now, if you haven't been around inflation very much, and if you haven't been through this, maybe you don't really know what's going on, or maybe you didn't study it in school, or maybe it wasn't a major topic. But let me explain what the difference really, understanding where we are inflation. Demand pull inflation when you have money chasing. Demand pull inflation when you had a great society that initiated Medicare, that started the civil rights movement, that was financing the Vietnam War. There was a ton of money pouring into the economy, and that money made it into people's pockets, made it into employers' contracts, and all that money was floating around. Milton Friedman came up with his monetary theories built around the fact going through the Great Society and the amount of money that was pouring in to the economy in the 1960s. When you think about the early rush inflation in the last couple of years, what's gone on? We had the Infrastructure Act, we had the CHIPS Act, we had the stimulus. We went through a pandemic in which a lot of people got stimulus checks and didn't have any place to spend because sheltering them. And we had the IRA, Build Back Better. All of that money pouring into the economy, offset to some degree by the Fed doing their quantitative tightening and taking almost $1 billion a year economy, but a trillion. You know, when the numbers get so big,
9 billion a month, 90 billion a month or something.
When the numbers get so
yeah, $1 here, $1 there, who cares?
Pretty soon it adds up to $1 trillion. That was similar to the Great Society and the inflation that was launched in 1960. It was really a demand pull. Too much money, too few good. But what happened in the 1970s is inflation really changed. Instead of too much money chase, you had OPEC deciding to drive up the price of oil, and instead of being a pull, you had a cost push because prices soared. And not only did oil prices soar, but it made a shortage of commodity, and wages followed along. During those times, cost push inflation is based about 1/3 on materials and 2/3 on labor rate. But during the 70s, it was primarily oil prices and commodities pushed inflation up. And as inflation is, the principle behind inflation is that prices go up like a rocket and down like it's very difficult to get prices. And what had to happen is that Volcker came along as head began to raise interest rates, exasperating the beginning of a recession. And you almost had to have that recession to squeeze down interest rates and to squeeze down materials consumption. If you look back at oil consumption in the United States, per capita oil consumption, we had a peak oil consumption in 1972. Consumption capita began to decline in 70. Most people listening, gas guzzler, 6 miles to the gallon, 8 miles to the gallon.
I remember them, Mike. My father had a green checker like the, it was army green, like the ones on, looked like the ones on that show Taxi, the ones that ran in New York City, got 8 miles to the gallon.
I remember what.
Yeah.
I mean,
But Mike,
YouTube came out with conservation and double windows.
But the point is, though, Mike, about inflation is that when they said inflation's inflation, and it is in the sense that how it acts in the economy. But wringing out cost push inflation is a lot. You can't turn around and create more gasoline really fast. You can't go out and create more wheat if it's a wheat right away. It takes time. Where with demand pull, you can raise interest rates and you can kind of get people to stop spending money and lower wages and affect unemployment.
It seems, in my opinion,
yes,
the cost push.
Agree.
Because we had oil demand and labor rates. We had to push interest. We had to push on them to the 8 or 9% level.
Right. And it's something that you and I talk about all the time, right? When we look for stocks, for changing demographics, changing lifestyle, and changing technology. When you're telling people that they gotta change, they gotta shut the lights off more, drive less. So you're talking about changing lifestyle for a lot of people. You can't drive the old gas guns. You got to go buy a new car and get something that gets 20 or 30 miles to the gallon.
Yeah.
These are changes in the lifestyle that people have to make.
And those were the changes.
But those changes don't happen overnight. Those are hard changes to make.
Oh, yeah. 7, 9.
It was easy for my father because he never turned the heat on anyway, so we didn't have to worry about it. That cheapskate. He was way ahead of OPEC.
No, it took a long time. I mean, what we've gone through now, everybody remarks at how fast inflation has come down. But we're dealing with a demand pull.
Right, and the cost push inflation, the cost push inflation we did see is from bottlenecks in supply chain, and we saw those kind of hit at the same time, which drove inflation. But once the bottleneck was spread out, all we had to do was deal with the demand pull, which was mostly done in wages because the unemployment rate, because of years of Bush, Obama, Trump, Clinton, their whole purpose was to create jobs.
And create jobs?
Yes.
And last year created. And we had 3 people join the Senate.
And we also had from 2008, we had almost artificially low interest rates. It's almost zero interest rates for 14 or 15 years.
But right now, with almost 1.5 jobs for every out-of-work worker, there's a big push on wages. And if you look at cost push inflation, wages are 2/3.
Right, but now the Fed's talking about getting it back down to this 2%. You and I talked about this 2% arbitrary number. If the Taylor principle is to keep the rate 1% above inflation, right? Historic inflation is about 3%. Why are they trying to drive it 1% below?
Because coming out of the great inflation, nobody wanted to go through that again. So if you can keep the inflation rate at 2% or a target of 2%, maybe you can keep it from ever launching up 2%. 10%?
I don't know. I don't.
I mean, that
well,
didn't work either.
No, and they thought in 1913. Well, wait, we got the Federal Reserve. We won't have any more recessions, depressions, or anything like that. Oh, really? That worked out real well.
Yeah, for 70 years, golden age.
Yeah,
yes.
right. So
I mean, the risk is by the end of the year, instead of inflation getting 2%, we could see inflation turn direction. Something to be aware of. We're going to come back and talk about the impact on the stock market because we think there's things to worry about in the stock. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this commercial break. And if you miss any of these programs, you can find them on YouTube. Check About Money, YouTube, or you can check our website as well. We're here with a purpose of bringing you ahead of the curve rather than behind it. Rather than analyzing today's data, we want to talk about what's going to be happening, not what happened yesterday. Don't go away. We'll be right back. We've been elaborating on this luncheon I had at First Trust. One of the things they talked about was on the stock market side, and what we've seen is a concentrated number of stocks that have beaten the S&P 500. It's the number that have beaten that index is so concentrated it resembles 1998 and 1999. And I remember that time very, very well. I remember particularly a client that I felt really sad about because during the mid-1990s, I was very much aware of the internet because when you looked at what was going on in computers, computer memories were doubling every 18 months. And that allowed companies like Microsoft and Oracle to write additional computer programming and continue to sell more and more products because memories were expanding to such a great degree. And in the mid-1990s, the internet was doubling not every 18 months, but every 6 months. And so it was a new technology. You could see something was going to happen. And in the early part of the 1990s, I owned for clients, I owned Mosaic and UUNet. Mosaic, which became Internet Explorer, and UUNet, which became Microsoft bought UUNet to become the backbone of the internet. But as time went on, all of these .coms began to grow, talking about potential in the future, but nothing to monetize. And I had a great deal of difficulty. I began to drop out of the internet and began to focus on other types of companies. So in 1999, the market, the NASDAQ was up 44%, and my clients were up 4%. I looked really stupid. And it was a similar situation, not 44%, but up in the 30% in 1998, and I was 4%. I looked really stupid. I had a client who decided in March of 2000 that it had it with me, that I was underperforming, that I was doing terrible. And so he transferred out his account. He sold everything that we've been holding, transferred it all out right at the top of the market. And he invested in internet stocks, which you saw a drop of 47% by the end of 2000. My clients, on the other hand, even though we'd had very poor performance in 98 and 99, instead of that 47% in 2000, we saw a 38% increase in 2000. And that was followed by a 28% increase in 2001. And I remember one stock, and I don't remember all the stock in the portfolio, but I remember one was Cooper Tire. I bought Cooper Tire. It had, if you looked at the chart of Cooper Tire when I bought it in 98, it looked like it was the EKG of a dead person. It was flat as it could be. Earnings were going up, revenues were going up, but the stock price was just stagnant and not retired during 2000, tripled value. But at that time, the whole focus was on looking at a technology and the potential for a huge, huge gain, and a new technology which, if people could figure out how to monetize, would be very big. But it got way ahead of itself. And you know what happened. You know the dot-coms. It became a famous time because the market dropped 47% in 2000, and it dropped another 30% in 2001. It seems like we're in a similar situation today. If you look at the what do they call them today? It's not the FANG stocks.
The Magnificent Seven?
The Magnificent Seven.
It is pretty much FANGs. Some of the FANG stocks, yeah.
But they've added a few more.
Well, they removed Tesla.
Today.
A couple days ago.
Ago, yes.
But it's Microsoft, I think Facebook, Amazon,
Google,
Alphabet, and
Netflix.
NVIDIA. I think Netflix. I'm not sure if Netflix.
Yeah.
But
the
Netflix
Magnificent Seven, the Magnificent 10, the Magnificent 6, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And it's all this thought of a technology which is going to be explosive in artificial intelligence. Alternative intelligence. No, it is a huge potential technology. But the question is, how do you monetize it?
They don't know how.
And until you know how to monetize it, all you're dealing with are stories and hopes and dreams.
You're dealing with companies that have massive data sets that are sitting there because some of the companies' stock went up, doubled last year because they have massive data sets. And if you read their 10Qs from 2022, they mention AI once or twice. In 2023, they mentioned an average of like 82 times.
Yep.
And their stock went up, and and now their stocks are dropping because they realize, oh wait, this company says that they have AI, but they don't know how to monetize it. They have a huge data set. They don't know what the heck to do with it.
And one of the catalysts that may happen is in Congress, they're beginning to take a bill that will allow people to take their data if they leave a platform. They also would want companies not be able to hawk their own proprietary product. Mm-hmm. There's changes which could affect these Magnificent 7 or Magnificent 10, Magnificent 6. I don't know. I don't remember what the catalyst was in March of 2000 that brought everything crashing down.
Well, you remember last year when they wanted everyone to put a stay on advancing AI?
Yeah.
I was like, it was sort of putting the cart before the horse. They didn't know what they were going to do with it and how fast they're going to go. And now all of a sudden they're off to the races with it. This is no more talk about putting a stoppage to advancing AI.
They can't stop.
No, they can't. Exactly. It was ridiculous.
Any more than you
stop.
could stop the internet, or any more you could stop airplanes.
Yeah.
Back in the time when people said if God meant us to fly, he would have given us wings. Technology is here. It is here. But until you know how to monetize, the companies that are flying high don't really have a way to monetize what they have. And the valuations today on those companies are higher today than they were in 2019. I mean,
you mean 2001. I mean, 1999.
Well,
did you say 2019? They're higher than the
2019 for the Magnificent 7.
Yeah, but they're higher than they were for the companies in 99. They were in the same position too. The valuations.
So we want to leave you with a couple cautions. One, the market is concentrated in a very few stocks. The chances are that's going to change. It's either going to put the other stocks up or those stocks down. Secondly, inflation is not just inflation. There's a difference between demand pull and cost plus. And we have a risk as demand pull comes down of switching to cost plus, and that moves the Fed to rate cost push. Thank you.
That's okay, Mike. Cost plus, cost push.
Yeah.
You're thinking of the store. Wasn't there a store called Cost Plus? It was. Yeah.
Anyway, that could cause the Fed to start bringing down rates and then reverse course. That could be a significant list for what happens in the market and in the bond market. So even though everybody is really optimistic for this year going forward, be cautious. And there are ways around it. We think that we know where to be and how to be to get through this whole bit of time. But then that's a story. Join us next Saturday. Have a very good week, a good weekend, and we will be back with more to talk about next Saturday, because if it is Saturday, we are talking about money. And you can find us on the internet by looking at YouTube. Check out YouTube About Money, or you can go to our website and check out where we are. It's going to be a very interesting 2024, and probably a lot different than most people. Have a great weekend and a great week.